Hi, guys. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Dharma Talk. I am Rabia, a psychotherapist in Houston, Texas. For any of you who are joining us for the first time, the word Dharma can mean many different things. The way I use it is as purpose and then also doing the right thing and sharing the right information. I created Dharma Talk to help provide anyone watching the truest, most factual information that I know, that I've had the privilege of learning. And then also my clinical experience and what I see going on in mental health. And often what I see in my offices is sort of happening in much of the US. I'm going to preface tonight's talk, so I'm getting into it a little bit more quickly because there's a lot to cover. I want to say that I will do my best to be objective, but I really, really, really need you to hear the information, the factual information of what abortion is, what a woman's right to her body means, what are the doctors seeing in their offices in real time. Because what we're hearing in the media, words like pro-abortion, I don't know anyone who's pro-abortion. And so that is misinformation or disinformation. Anyway, so I have a lot to get to. I've got two really good, amazing returning guests. My first guest is Monica Roberson. She is an OBGYN in Houston, and she practices integrative gynecology at the Healing Space, integrative medicine clinic in Houston. She attended UT Medical School in San Antonio and for medical school as well as OBGYN. She also completed, this is what I think is so neat, the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine Fellowship at the University of Arizona. And what makes Monica unique is that she has all of the medical training and she has the integrative side of it, which brings in a more holistic application or addition to Western medicine as we know it. I can go on and on about Monica, and we have a lot to get to. My other special returning guest is John T. Floyd. He is principal of the John T. Floyd law firm. John is a criminal defense attorney here in Houston, and he's board certified in criminal law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization, along with many other things. I want to welcome both Monica and John in. I want Monica, well, let me just have y'all come in. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Hello, Rabia.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to bring in the medical and the legal side. And I know that we're in the state of Texas. The three of us are in the state of Texas, but what we're talking about isn't just about Texas. And so thank you both for joining me. And Monica, I want to start with you. As an OBGYN, and then you're in practice now, can you explain what are we talking about when we talk about women's health and abortion and reproductive rights? What are we talking about? How do we get the terminology correct?
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of, I hate to say, not misinformation, but I just think when we don't speak of it in quite the right way a lot of times. But basically, from a medical perspective, an abortion is when obviously a pregnancy ends. There are spontaneous abortions, which is really not what we're talking about. That's a miscarriage. And well, although there's some gray areas where that that is partially included in what we're talking about, and we'll kind of get into that in a bit. But it basically, we say pregnancy begins at conception, right? And so that's 2 weeks after a period starts, just to get these terms out, because that will kind of help explain some of the things we'll be going through.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Yes, the terms are important. What you just said about a spontaneous abortion, and I know we'll get to this with the legal aspect, because with the word abortion, I don't know what the law is going to do in any of the states that are doing all of this. But what do you know about some of the statistics of women who come in?
Right. So we know that 93% of elective abortions are done within the first trimester. So that means within the first 13 weeks of pregnancy, or 11 weeks since conception. That's 93%. And so the vast majority, and this is, I think, what makes people so nervous, they don't understand all of this, the vast majority of the second trimester abortions, and third is just unheard of, but we'll get there. In Texas, I mean, I've never seen that in Texas, but anyway, the second trimester are typically because there's a problem, an abnormality with the fetus, or the mother's life is in danger. So I have seen, I'm talking on one hand, maybe a couple of instances in my personal experience, when an elective abortion was done for anything other than the two things that I just mentioned in the second trimester.
So we're not really seeing, oops, I got pregnant. It's not convenient for me, so I'm going to go have an abortion.
At 15 weeks, typically not. I mean, that's rare. That's rare. Again, I've been around OB-GYN since 1999, so maybe 2 times in all those years. And again, third trimester pregnancies have never been able to be aborted in Texas, and I can't speak much to that. But as soon as a baby's viable in Texas, always we've taken care of the baby. Always.
And so what are you hearing now about, we'll just use Texas as the example since we're here, about risks? What are we seeing as because of the shift into the 6-week law or the heartbeat law? Like, what are we seeing medically?
So Rabia, it's interesting because just before we came on, the Houston Chronicle put out an article about a new study that just hit the press out of Parkland, Southwestern, which UT Med School in Dallas. Basically, for women whose membranes ruptured between 15 and 23 weeks, they were forced to continue the pregnancy. These are pregnancies that could never, ever make it. There's no way that you're going to deliver a baby that's going to be alive. These women were forced to keep the pregnancy until they either became infected or passed the baby on their own. And they found that the risk of severe complications to these women doubled. We just found that out. It's hot off the press.
Wow.
A number of them ended up in the ICU. We know, I mean, the way I was trained, the way I was taught, of course, if the membranes rupture, if the pregnancy is not going to make it at 15 weeks, 23 weeks, where there's no chance of viability for the baby, that always the safest thing to do is to get the woman delivered because of that risk. And the risk of sepsis is quite extreme at that point in the pregnancy. And the longer a woman continues to have her membranes ruptured without having the baby, the higher the risk of sepsis and basically death, just for lack of a better way of saying it. Death.
And so membrane ruptured, what exactly do you mean? Like their water breaks or something's wrong with placenta or cervix?
That's right. The water breaks and maybe the baby hasn't quite passed, but the water's broken. So there's no possible way that the pregnancy can continue and be normal. It is impossible.
Well, and to be transparent, both of the pregnancies I lost were in second trimester. And the second one, neither one of them would have survived. And they weren't elective abortions or deliveries or anything. But in the second one, the baby had an infection, and my water broke. And I don't know if now I'd go to jail because of that, which is a horror upon a horror. But it's shocking to me what is happening. John, tell me from the legal side, what's going on?
Well, it's it's kind of a jumble right now. Texas has basically two laws that are kind of current laws that are on the books, and then there's a couple that are remnants from pre-Roe. The Attorney General is, has vowed to put forward on all those. He believes that that the legislation that was in effect pre-Roe is effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so as it stands right now, the 6-week ban is still in place. And so that is the current state of law, because there's been a lawsuit filed. A federal judge decided to not issue an injunction on that. It actually went up to the Supreme Court, and they refused to hear that and issue an injunction or order the lower courts to issue an injunction. So the 6-week ban is in place. There's basically another law, House Bill 1280, which was what everyone's hearing as this trigger law, right? These are laws that were passed in case the Supreme Court ever decided that Roe could be overturned. And so, of course, Texas has one of these on the books, and that law is waiting to take effect, which will virtually ban all abortions, regardless of the current 6 weeks rule. All abortions will be banned, save for just a few most extreme situations where the risk of the mother is death or serious bodily injury. And so we're really going back 50 years and going back soon. The trigger ban does not go into effect until the Supreme Court. I know the opinion's been issued, but there's a 30-day waiting period after the opinion is issued, so that both parties can object and make other arguments or try to. That is about to pass. I think that it is today, or it could have been. It may be today. Once that period passes, and if there's no more litigation and the case is final, there will be a judgment issued by the Supreme Court, and then the Texas trigger law goes into effect just about 30 days after that. So about a month from now, give or take a few days, all abortions are basically going to be outlawed, except for those for the life of the mother.
And so, what do we know exactly with that aspect right now? Do we have legal definitions around maternal life in danger? What do they mean exactly? Because
that's one of the issues, right? What it means right now is what a bunch of basically old white men decided it meant 50 years ago. And so all that is going to be litigated. Our biggest problem from a civil rights perspective, and I've been, I've worked with the ACLU. It's kind of my pro bono volunteer work for many years. And I know the lawyers right now are challenging some of the retroactive laws and some of the trigger laws, and all these issues will be raised, including, what these definitions mean. I mean, it's not a doctor's job to know what the legalese is, right? The problem in effect, though, is that the all your institutions are going to immediately stop doing them because they're afraid of being either prosecuted or sued. And so until all those things are worked out, you're going to see most of the providers shut down, and most of the clinics and hospitals that could, you know, give privileges in case of emergencies and those things are all they're going to immediately stop. Especially when we have someone like our currently indicted Attorney General Ken Paxton, who has vowed to vigorously prosecute these cases. And the laws on the books right now focus on the providers. They're not focused on the patient, and except for some of the lawsuits. And so really they're going to be going after the providers, scaring them with criminal penalties, lawsuits, and really doing everything they can do to shut this down.
So Monica, you know, you are a healer, and what you do is to take care of the human being in front of you,
right?
You know, and so if you're afraid, like, I don't know how a doctor can do her vocation with this hanging over their heads.
It's going to be very tough, because the reality, you know, the people that are going to be impacted, and this is what I think, I don't know what happens with this. People that are going to be impacted are the pregnant women that come in with an ectopic pregnancy at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I've been in this situation. I've been the doctor treating this patient before, patient X. You know, there are times where it is so severe that time is of the essence. And we're not talking hours, we're talking minutes. And if you don't save that woman's life immediately, that's it. I mean, there's right. So if there's gray zones with ectopic pregnancies, which, you know, are technically pregnancies that potentially can have heartbeats, I don't know how in good conscience this can be a question.
Yes. So I would love for Ken Paxton to come in and make an argument on what to do in that instance. You know, if it's his daughter or granddaughter or niece who might die, you know, within minutes, and there's like, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to be, you know, lose my license or whatever. There's some really interesting comments about abortion being legal. Lisa saying abortion was legal in this country from 50, sorry, my eyes, to the 1860s. And that life didn't begin until the quickening, which was usually movement in the body. And so what happened? I mean, we're not even going back to the 1950s. We're going back a lot further than that. And I don't understand precedent. Like, I cannot believe, because I'll tell you, like most things, it affects people that have less ability, less opportunity already, no money to be able to go somewhere. And if they're also, you know, trying to crack down on what's called, I think, Monica, medical abortion, or a chemical with the Plan B.
Right. Yes, that's chemical pregnancy. Yes.
And so do we monitor who goes in and out of the state? Are we monitoring emails, text messages? Like, I just don't, I don't understand.
And that's one of the real, from a civil liberties perspective, right? And we have all these HIPAA laws and all these protections to privacy. That's one of the areas that is very frightening to people who care about, you know, their civil rights and their privacy, is to know that you have people like our Attorney General and his cohorts who are basically vowing to investigate these cases. And so you could have, you know, situations where, you know, where the doc has to do an immediate procedure because of the life of the patient is threatened. And then, you know, what are you going to do? Justify all this, document all of this, Is someone going to report her when she goes back home that she's had a procedure, and there's going to be subpoenas issued and that kind of thing. And so there are a lot of problems that are going to be coming up. And just while I can, what got us here is we have this rise in this. Not only is it white nationalism, but it's paired with this evangelical movement that has decided that their religious beliefs trump everyone else's. And
that's right.
Yeah.
And that is the reality. Some of there have been a few civil rights organizations that are now actually raising challenges to these statutes now on freedom of religion basis.
Yes.
Which is very interesting, right? Because Eve, the Jewish law says one thing about when abortion is permissible.
Yeah.
Islamic law says another, and it is only these evangelicals who have decided to, because of what they believe and their religious beliefs, have decided to define life at conception, who are basically forcing their religious beliefs on everyone else. At the end of the day, that's what this is. So
separation between church and state is like, forget it. There isn't.
Yeah, forget it on this issue, right? Because and there's such hypocrisy in the system. You can't tell me that someone, and these are just examples, but someone like Ken Paxton, or someone like, there's all kinds of allegations now about him having girlfriends in office and running around. We have people like Trump, right, who ran on the anti-abortion bandwagon. You can't tell me that these gentlemen have not availed themselves to these services, or would not, if either they or someone in their family wanted to have them done. And so what it ends up happening is they put their people on a jet to go get it done somewhere. And poor people, Black and brown people, end up not having the same sort of medical treatment options as everyone else.
That's what it's really about. That's really the essence of what it's about, right there.
Yeah. And we get into then access to care and privilege and all kinds of, equal rights, civil liberties issues.
And forget when they're born, right? Then they don't want to take care of them then.
Oh, yeah. Forget
no benefits for anybody. No, where our school funding is they want to choke off all the school funding, all the benefits to people who need it, including mothers who need this kind of care, to help support children. So they're squeezing on both ends of this pipe, and something's got to give.
What I know about human nature is that if we really want something, we will figure out a way to do it. And if we're backed into a corner, we will risk our own lives. A teenager, or I think of that 10-year-old girl, right, who had to go to another state. But let's say she couldn't tell anyone. What might a 10-year-old do to her own body to get rid of this thing? There are teenage pregnancies. I don't see anything happening to the impregnators, because it can't happen by itself.
Right.
And so it seems to fall on the woman, which brings to mind female sexuality and the fear of that, and all kinds of other, I guess, moral, religious beliefs that some people may have and they want others to have. Lisa shared another interesting point, that the justification for initial abortion laws was a concern that white people were not having enough babies. Yeah.
It's got to be one. It's got to be one of them. There's this fear of the changing demographic.
Yeah.
I mean, you still hear it now, right? This whole conspiracy about the intentional browning of America, right?
Yeah.
And it just seems to lurk around in every argument that white men have had since the founding of the country.
Yeah. I'm also worried Sorry, were you going to say something, Monica?
It's disturbing. That's
Yeah.
all I said. It's entirely
Yeah.
disturbing.
What I'm also worried about, and what some of my clients who are going through fertility treatments are concerned about, is that when does this hit IVF?
Mm.
Because then that becomes, and having gone through the process myself, there are times when you have to take birth control to sync up, your cycle for the medication. And so what will happen to the access to birth control?
Right.
And then for those of us that also had to have surrogates or gestational carriers, that brings in another area that I think is up for grabs,
Oh, for sure.
like marriage equality. But
Mhm.
I'm going to stick to this particular issue because I could talk on and on. But that's a real fear that my clients have. And I don't know what to do with that.
It's so tricky. Who knows with any of this? Because there's some other questions that come up too. What if through IVF or through any of this, we have a baby, we have a baby that's brewing, that's not normal, chromosomally or whatever way. We have now so much technology that can keep the babies alive when they wouldn't have been kept alive previously. They would have passed after they're born.
Yeah.
But now we can keep them alive. Where does this fit in? Because
So, Doc, I got another question: is what do you do with all of the frozen embryos?
Oh, the questions.
Yeah, I mean, these guys have not thought it through.
No.
And it's astounding in this day and time that we're having in this country, that we're having this discussion.
Yeah, I think there's a massive lack of understanding of any of these medical questions, and there's just a jumping to this being a black and white answer when it's absolutely anything but a black and white answer. It's many shades of gray.
Yeah. So what, Monica, what does the public, because I think even when we present information, if there's not some understanding of how it all ties together, it's just like, not maybe the older women, but some of the younger ones that may not know what really is at stake.
Yeah. What's really at stake is when a woman becomes pregnant, her health, once we start getting into any of these questions, exactly as John pointed out, there's going to be questions on systemic levels, I would suspect, at hospital level, about what to do in certain situations. And because there may be gray areas and people may not know exactly what to do, I very much fear that a woman's life can be in danger.
Yeah.
On the line, in danger.
Yes, I think I'm still a little bit speechless because there's a lot of fear of further regression to a time, because I did a show recently on violence and mental health, and I focused a lot on like gun violence. This feels like violence against women. That's what it feels like.
It is.
That's what I hear in my office.
I think it is.
Yeah.
The part I'm most concerned about right now, until all this is really clearly delineated, are the women who are at extremely high risk with pregnancy, who are pregnant and have a very high chance of dying. For example, right? There's medical conditions like primary pulmonary hypertension, where when a woman who has this is pregnant, she has a 50% chance of dying. Or a woman with end-stage breast cancer. What happens in that instance is if she continues to be pregnant, and she has a very high likelihood of passing. And I could go on. There's many, many, many others. And this is what I think is just not understood, is there's so many complications with pregnancies. This is not simple. There's not black and white answers here, but women's lives are absolutely on the line. If we knew for sure that all these women would be okay and that no one would argue if the doctors do their job and try to save them, I think it would be one thing. But when all this is brought up to question, I just don't know. I think it's a very slippery slope.
And the burden that puts on the doctor, whose primary objective is to heal their patient, right? Having to make this legal analysis. I mean, what proportion are we talking about? What percentage? What am I going to be? And what am I willing to put my license and my livelihood and my family? I mean, if you're facing a lawsuit by these folks, it's very. I think the risk, a lot of people are just not going to be willing to accept it, and there's going to be passing the buck, and there's no one to take it at this point.
Yeah.
There have been providers who have been, threatened, bombed, shot, and those are the ones that were still around because others were afraid to do it. I mean, so they've already intimidated. There's been violence in this movement for decades, right? And now the violence has been institutionalized, where women cannot make their own choices about their own bodies, in consultation with whatever religious beliefs or family members or whatever. It's become, Ken Paxton and his, it's frightening.
It's horrifying. Sorry. There were some recent lawsuits that are going on because I think I was hearing on the news, and again, I'm listening peripherally, about district attorneys refusing to prosecute.
Mm-hmm.
And then what President Biden said, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, and then how the state of Texas is suing. I don't understand all of that stuff that's going on. So I'm wondering if you can explain, John.
So Biden did make a statement that he was at least considering some ideas about how to allow federal facilities and federal properties to continue, addressing women's health issues. And there have been threats by Paxton and all of his group to sue the federal government to prevent that from happening. There's all kinds of lawsuits all over the country filed on both sides about either moving this thing along, preventing the federal government from stepping in, and trying to speed this up, these active dates. There's litigation on the other side trying to do just the opposite. So we have a conflict in different federal districts right now regarding whether these trigger laws should go into effect, whether some of these old laws that predate Roe should go into effect. And so what you're going to see is all these things ending up back in front of the Supreme Court again, and we know kind of which way they're leaning already.
Yeah.
And so it's just opened up this Pandora box of litigation, and that's before we even get to the start line.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be a mess.
So in the meantime, Monica,
yes,
there are girls and women who will die because of this, there will be self-induced and medical reasons for that. And I don't know how many lives it's going to take, but it makes me very worried for my daughters, my nieces, other women who have no other option, and I really want to get away from this notion that it's a thing of convenience.
Oh, absolutely.
And that anyone who's not pro-life, or it's between pro-life and pro-abortion.
No.
And I don't see the consistency with what they're talking about when it's pro-life. because there's the woman's life and then there's the baby's life after birth.
That's right.
And if it is a baby that needs a lot of medical care, I don't know what the pro-lifers will do to provide the social support and the medical support, financial support for those babies. It's so illogical. And maybe when we get into these sort of moral, I do think keeping church and state, there's a reason to keep it separate if we're a country that honors everyone's right to believe what they believe as far as religion. And like you said, John, this is a white evangelical Christian.
Yeah, it's almost exclusively
Yeah.
a right-wing evangelical, movement that, unfortunately, it does contain other groups who have certain religious beliefs, but it's primarily the same group of white kind of nationalists that we see trying to do a bunch of other crazy things in this country, and that's just drag it back. And I wanted to say this. I mean, the right, the evangelicals that have been fighting this. I mean, this has been a long, intentional fight, and to be very honest, they've done a good job in their strategy to do this. To be, us on the other side really missed the ball by relying on the Supreme Court.
Right.
We should have been pressing, federal legislation and state legislation, but this is where we're at. And what bothers me is that they've been planning this since Roe, right? They've had this agenda to get the Supreme Court to overturn this since Roe, and they've had these litmus tests for all the Supreme Court judges, decade after decade after decade, and they've done nothing to fund the social net, to take care of people, take care of these children, to help promote healthy families, family planning. They're against all of it.
Right.
And so they're basically forcing women, we're going back to the times when they're almost using women as chattel, as forced breeders. I hate to say it, but that's, in reality, that's how it appears.
No, it looks like that. Every single form of contraception fails. Every single form. And so many of the abortions are just failures of birth control.
Right. And they don't want, and that's next, right? Then the next part of their agenda is to do away with birth control and family planning, because that is also contrary to their conception of their religious beliefs. And so it's I mean, where we're going with this, it really seems like we're on a crazy train, right? Especially when you mentioned it earlier, you have Justice Thomas mentioning in footnotes about how other things like, perhaps interracial marriage and gay marriage, I mean, all these things are all of a sudden coming back into the debate. And so, it's very frightening. And one other thing before I jump, I know I'm all over the place, but, in Latin America has had this experience, right? Right now, Mexico is leading, this part of the America in full kind of access to healthcare in this area. But prior to that, and so still some of the places in Central and South America where we've had these some kind of religious-based movements banning family planning and banning, decisions about abortions and whatnot. There have been cases where women have taken the day after, or taken other types of chemically induced abortions, thinking they would be fine. They'd write it out at home, no one would know any better, and they have an emergency, and need emergency care, have to go to the hospital, and by the time they're out, they're being prosecuted.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just, I'm afraid what you're going to see is people dying at home.
Yes.
Because they're afraid to go get care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd like to point out, we already have the highest rate of maternal mortality in the Western world. U.S. does, and out of the U.S., Texas is number one. So that's where we are, starting
number one
before this happened.
Monica, do you know the statistics of women of color and maternal and mortality?
Yes, I just looked at it earlier today. So in Texas right now, as it stands, the most recent data, so maternal mortality rate is essentially how many women out of 100,000 pass between the moment of conception until 42 days after delivery. So right now it's 33 for 100,000 for African-American women in Texas. It's 19 for everybody else, but it's, nearly double.
Yeah.
And definitely this all will harm them on many, many levels.
I've also heard, Doc, maybe you can help me with this. I've heard the statistic that a woman is more likely to face a life-threatening situation in delivering a child as opposed to, electing to not go through with the pregnancy.
Oh, absolutely. No, giving birth is one of the most dangerous things that ever happens to a woman during her life. Absolutely. Not a remote question. That's actually, surgical abortion is a very safe procedure. There's very, very few risks with it. Definitely same with medical.
Right.
Very few risks.
So what are we going to do, before it goes into other, sorry, going back, John, I had this question about what does codify mean? Because I've been hearing this a lot. Codify Roe v. Wade, and what is that? And what can the president legitimately do against the Supreme Court?
So basically right now, the Supreme Court is just saying, hey, the states have a right to do this, right? Codify just means that legislation's been passed and signed by the president and it's become a law, right? So or if we can get legislation passed, which basically puts the constitutional protections that Roe has, had in effect for the last 50 years, and maybe expand those rights and really delineate what all these things mean. They could pass a federal statute, and they could do it yesterday if they had the votes, right? Because this is obviously, this is a matter that affects the entire country. People are having to travel across borders, which means there's a federal connection to all of this. They could pass legislation which would make abortion legal. It would make it private. It would make it a right. And the president could sign it. Now, the problem is not having enough legislators to get it done, because we still have this filibuster in place, which a lot of people don't understand, right? We have in order to get something on the floor of the Senate, you have to have 60, not 50, not 51, who agree. And it's a trick. And it's the old days of the filibuster where guys would stand up and actually, it was all guys, get up and argue and debate and keep the floor open by talking. As long as they've passed rules now to just say you need 60 before you can get it to the floor. So that means you would have to get 60, all the Democrats and 10 of the Republicans to get that passed. And right now, there's not the votes to get it done.
So that leaves anyone watching, who's 18 or older, with the task of, I don't even think it's civic duty. I think it's a human duty, to look out for your fellow human.
Yes.
To go and vote in November for, maybe for freedom, because the United States is supposedly the haven for freedom. That's why many of us came over here, for freedom and opportunity. And that's not what's happening.
Right.
You know, and I am worried it'll go into segregating schools again. And I'm in an interracial marriage. So what does that mean? You know, all the other people that are in same sex, you know, loving human beings that actually make the world so much healthier and safer to be in a freer, more loving, less fearful state of being, which is where the mental health part comes in. And we're going the complete opposite, you know, where there's a violent attack on a human's freedom.
Right. You know, one of the things that can be, if people are really wanting to activate and do something, you know, they're, for example, the Supreme Court justices, this 60 vote filibuster rule was modified so you only need 51, right?
Yeah.
So or 50 to get it on the floor, and so they could make an exception if they could get the votes together to add, you know, create an exception to the filibuster rule for abortion, for voting rights, whatever, you know, whatever that is. And so I would encourage people, if they are passionate about this, to start reaching out to their federal legislators, especially their senators, and start putting pressure on people to vote for freedom, because this is really what this is all about.
Yeah.
Is are we going to be a society where people are free to choose based on their own values? Look, no one is forcing anyone to have an abortion.
No.
No one's doing that. We're not forcing people to, you know, have same-sex marriages. We're not forcing people to participate in things that they are religiously opposed to doing. It's just the opposite.
Yeah.
Is the religious people in this free country where we have a separation of church and state. It's the religious people who are using their bully pulpit right now, their power, to oppress people who don't believe the way they do, and to strike our freedoms. And so this is something that, you know, whether you, I mean, no one wants to have an abortion.
Yeah.
You know, even if you are someone who personally disagrees with it, but thinks that it runs contrary to your religious beliefs, that's not what's at stake here.
No.
And no one's going to force your family to do this.
Yeah.
What you're doing is just standing up for freedom, when we want all of us to have the ability to make our own choices, and also to cut our doctors some slack and let them do their jobs without having to worry about getting sued or incarcerated.
Yeah.
Just to do the right thing for the patients. But I think everyone that's listening, we can all make sure to vote, and remember that, you know, voting for people who are going to support women's health is really, it's voting for women's lives more than anything.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. So November this year is important. It's critical, I think. And for Texas, would it do any good to reach out to Ted Cruz? I don't know, you know? Like, does he give a shit?
Says the therapist. It never hurts to contact your senator, let them know how you feel, especially if you are a constituent. You know, at some point, these guys, look, they're all, when it comes to it, they all want to be reelected. When it comes to, you know, standing for principle, and at least our senators have been cowards on many occasions. And so they need to know that there might be electoral consequences down the road. I mean, there are Republican women who are offended by this notion, and reaching out to those people, and people who have connections with these representatives, these senators, people who are donors.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have friends that are Republicans who support this party, they need to be the ones hitting up these senators, because they're not going to listen to me.
Well, and I also want to say, it's not a disloyal thing to pick principles and love and freedom over a party identification.
Right.
You know, because I think the majority of Americans, at least the ones I know, want freedom, you know, want their daughters or themselves or whatever to have control over their bodies, and who want to marry who they love or not marry, or be trans, like not be trans, but just to be who, if you want to use God, who God created you to be. So I'm not really, so I urge any of you that are worried, it will get worse. It will definitely get worse if we don't do something as soon as possible. And it's reaching out, writing letters, talking to people, and please vote for people who maybe represent the majority and not this very small minority who's in power right now.
Right.
Anything, Monica, what would you say to, let's say, a teenager who finds herself pregnant right now? What did she do if it's incest or rape or date rape, or her contraception didn't work, or the guy's condom broke? Like,
John, what can I legally say?
I mean, there's very little. I mean, publicly, probably not a lot. I think the thing to do right now is to educate the patient as to other resources that are out there. There are national resources that people can turn to that aren't shy about giving advice. If you go to, I should have had this link, but I know if you go to the ACLU's website, they have an update right now, and they have referral sources to some of these national organizations that are not afraid to give advice and are being very careful to make sure they're giving the correct advice. So that women who find themselves in these what are terrifying situations, especially for a lot of people who are needing these resources, they can go and get someone maybe who's not in their state, who can tell them about their options. I know there's a lot of groups that are also getting together to help with some of the medicines that could help. And so, until we have some more guidance, Doc, that's what I would be doing, because we live in one of the worst states right now, as far as the expressed intentions of our leadership, and they're looking for someone to make a point, right? And you don't want to be that person. So if I'm advising doctors right now, until we have some guidance on the books, I advise them to start, showing empathy and direction and referring out to some of these resources that can help. Because we don't really know. I mean, I don't know. Are they going to start going after people who are, prescribing Plan B, right? I mean, right now they're acting as if they're not, but I think that they're just being coy. I think that's
yeah.
It's currently over the counter, but who knows? Who knows next week?
Yeah.
Rabia, the one thing I would say, one thing that we can control is I would remind every woman of reproductive age, and man, everybody needs to know this. If you're sexually active with somebody of reproductive age, 2 forms of contraception. Do not trust one. They all fail. Use 2, and always use condoms until you're certain it's okay. Right.
And Monica, there was another statistic I'd heard that majority of women who go in for abortions are already parents.
Oh, they are.
For economic or health reasons.
Right. Average woman has 1 child. She is in her late 20s, actually, and she lives below the poverty line, and generally makes you think that it's probably done for financial reasons.
Yeah. So
this is family planning, right? I mean, you know what it is now, and you want to plan. There are people who will plan to have who need to have an abortion, and then later on will have additional children as well. So it's just bizarre that the situation we're in.
So I will say that for white evangelical Christians, if we continue with this, please expect a lot more babies, that may not follow your belief system. And so be prepared for that, which I guess is, you don't know what I'm saying. I don't even.
I think we all know what you're saying, Rabia.
Yeah. So courage matters.
Courage matters.
Yeah, and taking a stand really matters right now.
Right.
John, you were going to say something.
No, I know that what you said was said in jest, but here we are. This is the same group, right, that is so adamant about possessing these weapons of war and needing to carry them around with their 100-round clips of ammunition. And they want the government out of their life, right? It's the same people that when we asked them to wear a mask, right? It was like, my body, it's my body. And it's something as fundamental as reproductive freedom, a choice that will change your life forever and may threaten your life. They're just cavalier about it. It's so just intellectually dishonest.
So dishonest.
Yeah. And Monica, for all the other healthcare providers whose number one oath is, to do no harm, you have my support. And I think I feel for the position that the medical community is in.
Never could have imagined being here.
Yeah. So we fell asleep at the wheel, maybe.
We did.
Not knowing Gilead was happening, for those of you who know that reference. So I want to thank both of you guys, Monica and John, for taking the time out and having this very robust conversation. I think this will be continued, and I hope we can do this again. And I want to thank anyone who's watching for tuning in, and maybe you learned something. I don't know. I hope so. Maybe you got some good information. And if you know anyone else that needs the kind of information we talked about today, please forward this video to them. And you can see it on YouTube or Facebook. Monica and John, how can people reach out to you? Monica more for the integrative gynecology, John for criminal law. So, but how can people reach you guys?
My office number is 713-520-6800.
Okay, 7135. And John?
Easiest thing to do is just Google my name, John T. Floyd. You'll find my website. My practice is criminal defense, but I am active in the civil rights arena. And so if people have questions about this, I'd be glad to take the time to talk to them about it.
Well, thank you both. And thank you guys for watching. I know I usually end with this, but I'll say it again. You matter. Truth matters. Language matters. Your vote matters. And freedom matters. So until I see you guys again.